Well, one night when I was in college, I was playing basketball, and I sprained my ankle really bad. The next morning, I tried to get up out of bed, and I couldn't put any weight on it at all. It just hurt. But I tried and just climbed back into bed. But then it got to be lunchtime, and I was hungry. And the only way I could eat is if I could get to the dining hall. And so I sucked it up because I wanted to eat. I sucked it up. I got out of bed and I walked over there, and it hurt. And I limped so bad that I almost touched the ground with my hand every single step. I was like, oh. I almost fell every time. And then there was another time when I tore my MCL, the ligament on the inside of the knee. And I was in so much pain, I could hardly walk. And eventually I went to the doctor, I got a brace that I put on that knee, and it helped a lot. But they gave me a brace that completely immobilized my knee. They should have given me a brace that had a hinge to it so I could continue to walk correctly a little bit. After the pain was gone and I wasn't wearing that brace any longer, I couldn't walk correctly. My knee didn't bend very much at all. And so I walked slow, and I had a bad limp. My walk wasn't good. This morning, we want to ask the question, how's your walk? But I don't mean your physical walk. God uses the picture of walking to talk about our spiritual life and our relationship with Him. Remember, we just saw this. He told Abraham, walk before me and be blameless. And so, spiritually speaking, or morally speaking, walk tall, walk strong, walk correctly, walk the way you're supposed to walk. And God has told us through the Apostle Paul to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. So, how's your walk? Are you walking in God's ways? Or are you walking in the world's ways? Or maybe, are you walking with a limp, trying to walk both ways, with one foot here and one foot there? Now, we'll see all three of these walks in our passage today. So first, we see Abraham doing well. He is walking in God's ways. So let's begin chapter 18 and verse 1. And the Lord appeared to him, speaking of Abraham, appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet and rest yourself under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourself, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, do as you have said. And Abraham went quickly into the tent to Sarah and said, quick, 3 seahs of fine flour, knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. And so this chapter is continuing and building upon what happened in the previous chapter. In the previous chapter, God had just confirmed his covenant with Abraham and told him to walk before him and be blameless. And that section ended with Abraham's immediate and complete obedience to God as he followed the command to circumcise all the men in his household. And so that chapter concludes with Abraham living in relationship with God and acting in faith. And now that relationship continues. Also in the previous section, God told Abraham that his promised son would be born through his wife, Sarah. But now, God appears to Abraham to tell him that it's time for that promise to be fulfilled. And so right off the bat, we are told what's happening here. It says, God appeared to Abraham. And it's the heat of the day. In other words, it's the time in the middle of the afternoon when it's hot and everyone looks for shade and they rest. But while Abraham is sitting in the shade, suddenly, look, 3 men are standing there. Now, these 3 men are God and 2 angels. Now, we know what's happening here because we were already told God appeared to Abraham. But did Abraham know that this was God? Well, we don't know for sure, but it seems like he at least suspects it right away. But it's presented as if he is seeing 3 men. So he sees what? 3 men. On the other hand, it's presented like they just appeared out of nowhere. And it may imply that it's more than just 3 men. Or it could be that Abraham was kind of dozing off in and out, and all of a sudden he noticed them there. But either way, he runs to invite them to stay and to rest and to share a meal with him. Again, it could be that he knows right away that this is God, and that's why he runs in order to honor God, not keep him waiting. Or he's hurrying to make up for the fact that he didn't notice them coming. But either way, whether he knew or whether he suspected it was God or not, it didn't take him long to figure it out. And Abraham here is a picture of perfect hospitality. I mean, he's humble, he's others-focused, and he is a giving servant. And he moves quickly to help the travelers. Even though it's hot and he would normally be resting at this time, he gives up his own comfort and he works for the comfort of the travelers. And he downplays his generosity. He offers them a little water and a morsel. But then he gives them an elaborate meal. Actually, a meal fit for a king. So we see that God is gracious and giving. And as God is gracious and giving, his people who walk in his ways will also be gracious and giving. But beyond hospitality, there's another important thing we see here. God is coming to discuss his promise with his covenant partner. And they eat together. Now, meals are an important act of fellowship. So this emphasizes the relationship that they have with each other. And before they get down to business, they spend time fellowshipping together as they eat this meal. Sometimes we can get so busy doing all the things that we need to do, or that we can do all the right things, or go through the motions of worship without really spending time with God. But sometimes we just need to be with God. Spend time with him. Fellowship with him. It's not all business. It's a relationship. And so, be still. Talk to him. Read his word. Listen to him. Take time to fellowship, truly fellowship with God. Well, let's keep reading. Verse 9. It says, they said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, she is in the tent. The Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? The Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. He said, no, but you did laugh. And so God asks where Sarah is. Now, it's not because he doesn't know where she is. He knows. But he's getting to the reason for his visit. He's going to talk about her and this child to be born. And he's getting Sarah's attention. She needs to hear this. So he's drawing her into the conversation. Well, she's inside the tent. So this is kind of like being in the next room and all of a sudden you hear someone mention your name. Someone's talking about, what? And so she perks up and she's listening. She's now paying attention, which is good because she needs to hear this promise. And God tells Abraham that within this next year, Sarah will give birth to a baby boy. Now, Sarah hears this and does what? She laughs. To herself, of course. But why does she laugh? Because she doesn't believe it. But why doesn't she believe it? Because she's old. She's already gone through menopause. In other words, she is no longer able to get pregnant. So she thinks to herself, yeah, right. Now, that's impossible. But God knows what she's thinking. And he knows that she laughed, and he gently corrects her. He asked Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? And then he goes on to say that nothing is impossible for God. See, he knows the situation. He's not surprised by this. What? Sarah can't have kids anymore? No, he knows exactly what's happening, and it will happen. She will have a child. Now, I don't know if at this point Sarah comes out of the tent and joins the conversation directly, but we're told that she denies it. She tries to deny the fact that she laughed. No, I didn't do that. Which is ironic because she lies straight to God, who has just told her what she was thinking. All right? He knows her thoughts. It's obvious. And God says, no, you did laugh. And there are two important things happening here. First, God is demonstrating his own greatness. I mean, he knows what Sarah's thinking, and he tells her. This reminds her to think about who he is and who she's talking to, who is making this promise, and to know that nothing is too hard for him. And as he confirms that she will have a son, she is reminded to trust God. The second thing is God is very direct, and he corrects her. This removes the obstacle between her and God, the obstacle in the way of her fellowship with God. I mean, think about this. Why would she have lied in the first place? We're told she was afraid. Well, she was probably embarrassed. And she didn't want God to know that she was thinking such a thing, that she didn't trust him, that she didn't believe. She's trying to downplay her disbelief because she knows she was wrong and she's trying to hide it. But this can't just be swept under the rug. So God brings it out into the open. So now there's no lie left between them. And this restores the relationship to good standing. God's people who are walking in his ways don't hide their sin from him, or try to. They confess their sin and are forgiven by God. And God's people who are walking in his ways believe God and trust him. Let's keep reading, verse 16. Then the men set out from there, and they looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him." Then the Lord said, "Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know." So the men turned from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham stood still before the Lord. And so they finish eating and they finish talking about the baby, and they start saying their goodbyes. And as they're walking, God lets Abraham know his plans, what he's about to do, because Abraham is his covenant partner. And this is an opportunity to teach Abraham about righteousness and justice. So Abraham, he will have to teach his son to live right before God. And he will have to, that teaching would have to be passed on not only to his son, but down to through the generations of Abraham's descendants. And so God is going to carry out justice and punish sin, and he wants to teach Abraham about righteousness and justice. And so there was this outcry from Sodom. In other words, God has taken notice of the great evil being committed in Sodom and Gomorrah. And now he says that he's going down to see if it's really that bad. Now, does God know? Yes, he already knows that it's that bad. But he is demonstrating to Abraham, he's demonstrating his justice, that he does what is right. God doesn't just judge people or pass sentence on people without fully knowing the situation, without knowing the sins that were committed. And so the two angels, they go down towards Sodom to act as witnesses against the wicked. But God stays with Abraham. But now that God has said this, what he's doing, there's a huge elephant in the room. Because Abraham is probably feeling a little uncomfortable at this point. Because God is talking about destroying Sodom. And who is living in Sodom? Lot, his nephew. And so what will happen to Lot? Will he suffer judgment along with the unrighteous, the wicked? But it appears God stays there to give Abraham a chance to say something. Look at verse 23. Then Abraham drew near and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? And then catch this. Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is right? He's not criticizing God here. He's saying, wait, you're righteous, so you wouldn't do that, right? But he's appealing to God here. Verse 26, and the Lord said, if I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Abraham answered and said, behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. I am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for a lack of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. Again he spoke to him and said, suppose 40 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. Then he said, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there. He answered, I will not do it if I find 30. He said, behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again, but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. You'll notice Abraham is very respectful here. And at the same time, he is very bold. And he steps out in faith, and he discusses the situation with God. And he discusses God's character. You see, he's looking out for Lot, and he's making a plea on Lot's behalf. But he's doing it by appealing to God's character. He knows that God is just, that he is righteous, and he does what is right, and there's no way he could do wrong. That's why he says, far be it from you. He's saying, you're righteous, you're just, so you wouldn't destroy the righteous in judgment along with the wicked. But you'll notice he works his way from 50 to, what if there's 50 people in the city, all the way down to, well, what if there's 10? Now, 50 would be about half of an average size city. So this seems like a good place to start. Kind of like saying, well, what if it's 50-50? What if it's half righteous? Half the people there are righteous. You wouldn't destroy the whole city for half of them, would you? Because of half of them, would you? But then he works his way down to 10. And if it was any less than 10, well, that's just a handful, and they could be saved individually, which is what we'll see happen. But God confirms to him that he is just, and he will do what is just, and then God leaves. And God's people who walk in his ways, they know what God is like. They know God. And so they know his ways, and they seek to live in his ways. And that also means they seek out justice. So, are you walking in God's ways? And we are definitely called to. Let me read this for you. Ephesians 4:1 says, I, therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. Colossians 1:9-10 says, and so, from the day we heard, we have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of God. Micah 6:8 says, he has told you, O man, what is good, And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? In Ephesians 5:15-17 says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. So, how's your walk? Are you walking in God's ways? How's your walk? Well, now at this point, we're going to see just how bad things are in Sodom. And Lot, he's right there in the middle of it. We could say that he is walking with a limp. You'll see what I mean. Look at verse 1, chapter 19, verse 1. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, my lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way. They said, no, we will spend the night in the town square. But he pressed them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, and all the people to the last man surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them. Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door after him, and said, I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have two daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. But they said, stand back. And they said, this fellow came to sojourn. In other words, he came to live here. He's an outsider who's living here. And he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break the door down. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out, groping for the door. Now, where is Lot when the angels come to town? He's sitting in the gate of Sodom. Now, the gate is where city leaders and the city elders, the city leaders, would sit to discuss the affairs of the city and to judge legal issues. And so this raises the question, is Lot actually a leader in the city now? At the very least, he is part of the community. In fact, he calls the men at the door his brothers. He says, my brothers. He's one of them. In fact, on the other hand, he's also different. I mean, we see this. He shows hospitality to these men, and he is concerned for these visitors' well-being because he knows what the other people in Sodom will do to these men if they stay out in the open. If they just camped out in the middle of the city, in the city square, town square, he knows how evil people are there in town and what will happen to them. And so he insists that they come to his house in order to protect them. But the people noticed that the men had come and that they went to Lot's house. And so that evening, all the men of Sodom go and they demand that Lot give the men to them so that they can know them. Now, this to know them is a euphemism for sex. It's knowing someone in the most intimate of ways. But ironically, these men, they don't want to know these men at all. They don't care about them. They have no love for them. All they want is sex, stripped of morality, stripped of intimacy, and stripped of propriety. And they demand it as if it's their right. This idea sounds a whole lot, it sounds very familiar to what is happening in our culture today. There is rampant casual sex happening, pornography and homosexuality and other immoral deviations. And the attitude that they have is that it's a right. It's my right to do this. And you can't, or at least you're not supposed to, in any way, say or suggest that it's wrong. Well, when the men come, Lot says no. He is repulsed by their evil. But then he offers another evil in its place. He offers his own daughters. This is disgusting and horrible. There's nothing good about this suggestion, this offer. So you have Lot here. He knows right and wrong. He knows God's morality, but he's compromised. How did he find himself in this situation? Well, it's the consequence of his bad choices. He chose to identify with this godless society. He is trying to live in two worlds. Have you ever tried to walk with a kid holding onto one of your legs? My kids used to sit on my foot. They would grab my leg and sit on my foot, and I would walk around. And the bigger they got, the harder it was. And sometimes I was basically dragging this foot. This is Lot. That's the way he's living. He's trying to live in two worlds, where one leg is moving correct and the other leg just won't move right. He's trying to hold on to the ways of God and hold on to the sinful ways of the world. He's walking with a limp. And that's the walk of compromise. The sinful men of Sodom, though, they won't listen to Lot. In fact, they get mad at Lot for suggesting that what they're doing is wrong. See, they were okay with him until he started telling them what was right and wrong, until he started calling out their sin. And at this point, they reject him, they reject his morality. And the men who he was trying to save end up having to save him. Well, at this point, the guilt of Sodom has clearly been confirmed. In fact, did you notice? It wasn't just a few people from Sodom who came to Lot's door that night who were acting this way. Look at verse 4 again. Chapter 19, verse 4. It says, but before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man surrounded the house. So God is not acting arbitrarily here. He is not acting in an unjust way for judging Sodom. The people are wicked. The people are guilty. Well, let's keep reading. Verse 12. It says, then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here, sons-in-laws, daughters, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city, bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place because the outcry against this people has become great before the Lord. And the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, or basically men who were engaged to his daughters, who were to marry his daughters, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-laws to be jesting. So there are not 10 righteous people in town, but God will save Lot and his family. Now, 2 Peter says that Lot was righteous. He calls Lot righteous. And we can see some evidence of that. But we also see that there's some issues with Lot. You see, Lot is a bit of a paradox. And we don't know what exactly to think of him. And neither did the men who were engaged to marry his daughters. He can't convince them that judgment is coming. He can't convince them that God is going to destroy the city. He can't convince them that they need to leave. Why not? It's because he's different, but not different enough. They probably wonder, how would you know what God is going to do? They don't respect him enough. He has no moral authority to speak from, and they just don't believe him. Verse 15. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take up your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought them out, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away." And Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lords. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city," he points to a city up ahead, "behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved." He said to him, "Behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there." Therefore the name of the city was called Zor. Then the sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zor. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife, behind him, looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. So there goes limping Lot again. The angels tell him, "Hurry, get out of town." And what's he do? He lingers. He hesitates. He doesn't want to leave. He's kind of torn, like, well, I guess I should get out of town, but I like it here. He's comfortable with life in Sodom. And he apparently feels safer inside the city than outside the city with God. Because after he leaves, he complains about the way he's being saved. I mean, he's grateful that he's being saved, but he complains about how they're doing it. "I can't go to the hill country. That doesn't work for me. Can't I just go to that little city over there?" And God is gracious and he allows it. But notice how different Lot's attitude is from Abraham's. When Abraham was talking to God and saying, "Well, what about this? What about this?" When Abraham was talking to God, he was very respectful. And he was seeking to protect the righteous. Abraham was seeking justice. Lot doesn't care about justice. He's not concerned with justice here. He just is concerned with himself. He wants to be comfortable. And so he asks God to spare a city that also deserves judgment because it's small, because there's only a few people there. Can you spare those few people so that I can keep a lifestyle I'm comfortable with? And then on their way to the city, his wife directly disobeys the command of the angels, who said, hurry, don't look back, don't stop. But it's not just that she looked back. It's why she looked back. You see, she is longing for the city. She's longing for her old life there in Sodom. And in that moment, she's identified with that city. And she is one of them, and she suffers the same condemnation and is turned to salt. Well, let's read the last few verses here. Verse 27. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. And so Abraham sees the aftermath of God's judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah, and he learns the verdict. There were not 10 righteous people in town. But God graciously delivered Lot. But why? He doesn't say because Lot deserved it. No, semi-righteous Lot was saved because of Abraham. This is the second time that Abraham has saved Lot's life. And in the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah and the rescue of Lot, we see an example of justice and mercy. But you know, the greatest expression of justice and mercy is the cross, where Jesus died. Where Jesus died to pay for our sin. He died to pay sin's price so that all who believe in him can be forgiven and have eternal life. You see, sin must be punished. It's justice. And God extends mercy and grace. But there's another lesson for us here. Trying to walk in God's ways and in the world's sinful ways just doesn't work. The two ways are opposed to each other. You end up conflicted. Your affections are divided, and you may find yourself in a position of having to make choices where there is no good choice to make. So, are you walking with a limp, straddling two worlds? How is your walk? Well, now we come to the third way of walking. When God's ways are rejected, we are left walking in the world's ways. Look at chapter 19, verse 30. It says, Now Lot went up out of Zoar, so he left the little city, and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters, and the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come in to us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. The next day the firstborn said to the younger, Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. Now this is a sad ending to the account of Lot and his family. They are afraid and faithless. I mean, first they leave Zoar, that little city. We're not told why he's afraid and leaves. But he's afraid and he leaves. And then they have another problem. You see, the daughters look around and they say, we're living alone. So there's no one to marry them. No one to have children with them, but they want to have children and carry on their family name. They want to do what everybody does. This is what people do. So we need to have kids. But the real problem here is that they have no faith in God. And so they come up with a plan. And you'll notice they think just like the people of Sodom. They haven't learned right and wrong. Maybe they were never taught right and wrong. But they definitely learned from their culture. They learned from the sinful society that they lived in. And so they come up with this terrible, sinful plan. The first part of the plan is to get Lot drunk. Why do they need to get him drunk? Because they know that Lot would never go along with this. Then, while he's drunk, they commit incest with their father. And this happens twice, and Lot knows nothing of it. But then they both have sons, and the names of their sons hint at how they were born. Because the name Moab sounds like the Hebrew phrase, from our father. And the name Ben-Ami means son of my people. It seems like they were proud of themselves. See what we pulled off? And they named their kids, it's almost like arrogantly, a reminder of what they've done. They're proud of themselves. But you know what? I've noticed that people who walk in the sinful ways of the world are often very proud of their sin. But this is not the way for Christians to walk. 1 John 2, verses 15 and 16 say, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all this that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. Colossians 3:2 says, set your minds on the things that are above, not on things that are on earth. And Romans 12:2 says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And parents or grandparents, our kids learn from our culture every day. There is a constant influence from our world. But they learn God's ways from you. You have to teach them right and wrong. You have to teach them God's morality. You must feed them with the truth of God if you want them to walk in God's ways. And let me warn you of a common pitfall that we see. If you, as the parent, as the grandparents, if you give things of this world priority over the things of God, they will learn that too. and you will reinforce what the world is teaching. So be careful how you walk in front of them. So how's your walk? You may be walking great, or maybe you're on the wrong road completely, or maybe you're walking with a bit of a limp. As followers of Jesus, we want to walk right, correctly. But the world keeps pulling on us. And maybe your affections are divided. But God says, walk before me and be blameless. You know, back when I tore my MCL, when I tore the ligament in my knee, I had to purposely relearn how to walk correctly. Even after the pain was completely gone, I was still limping. You see, my body had gotten used to walking incorrectly. And it was easier to limp than to walk right. And so I had to go to physical therapy. And I needed help. I had to strengthen my knee, and I had to train myself to walk correctly. I had to think about how I was walking, and I had to be committed to walking right. And I even prayed. It was hard. I even prayed and asked God to help me. And this speaks to our spiritual walk as well. If you are struggling to walk in God's ways, you need to pray and ask God to help you. You've got to train yourself for the purpose of godliness. You need to commit to God and discipline yourself to walk in His ways. And you may need help. But you know, that's why the church is here. That's why we gather together. The body of Christ. You have fellow Christians who are also striving to walk in God's ways, who can come alongside of you and help you. We are walking this road together. We're following Jesus together. So I ask one more time, how's your walk?